Hello everyone, good evening, Chicago. How's it going? There we go. All right. Well, look at this. It's Thursday. It's time to talk taxes, right? Thank you everyone for coming out. My name is Ben Schulman. I'm a civic strategist here in Chicago, a writer on urban planning policy and architecture, and a board director of the Progress and Poverty Institute, the organization that put tonight together with a raft and host of partners who will be thinking throughout the evening. Welcome to Tax and the City. Test number one. Does he know how to operate a clicker? You thought you were at Tax in the City. You're just going to get 90 minutes of my impersonations of economists throughout the years. Not really. Okay, so for this crowd, this slide probably needs little introduction, right? On here, you can see that one Fay Lewis, landholder, has erected a billboard. And on this billboard, it says, "Everybody works, but the vacant lot." This billboard is sharing the speculator's logic. I paid $3,600 for this lot and will hold till I get $6,000. The profit is unearned increment made possible by the presence of this community. Fay is stating something clearly here. Fay is getting something, a return, for doing nothing. Now the remedy, as offered, is by reading Henry George. By the way, hopefully everyone had the opportunity to enter the raffle. Upon entering and registering, we will be raffling off a tote bag at the end of the evening, including this book. So stay tuned, gotta stay till the end, right? Henry George was a 19th century economist. Somewhat of a pop figure, a little bit of a pop icon of his time. And in his book, Progress and Poverty, he proposed a more equitable mechanism of taxing land where scarcity really resides, rather than property, the improvement upon that land. And this is what Jones is teasing at. And well over 100 years after George's writings, the problem of the speculator's logic continues to affect our cities. You build something, you pay more in taxes. So I'm going to put Henry down for a second. You sit on a vacant lot, you pay less. Now this has a real compound effect on places. In the city of Chicago proper alone, there are over 30,000 vacant lots, approximately 10,000 of such, which are city-owned. Crane's Chicago Business recently covered the fact that property taxes have risen over 180% since 1995. So over 30 years, twice the rate of inflation. Which begs the question, well, what is there to do? Also about 30 years ago, the Italian sociologist Marco Diormo came to Chicago and wrote a book called The Pig and the Skyscraper, Chicago, A History of Our Future. And in this almost de Tocqueville way of meandering around Chicago and observing what he saw, he asked that same question, like, what do we do? And through his telling that Chicago has not only invented much of the modern mechanisms and innovations of the modern city itself, but it was continuing to do so. So what is it that we do? Well, we've given the world the skyscraper, I'm one slide ahead, and the balloon frame home. Chicago has always built the solutions that the rest of the world copies. We've given the world the bungalow, innovations in housing typologies, and some could say the perfection of use and or misuse of financing instruments like TIFs. And of course, the plan of 1909, which led Chicago to be called, in many respects, the most perfectly planned city in the world. We have always built the solutions for the rest of the world to copy as a city. And this moment is the next one that we are planning for, because things are changing. Because pressures on our cities are rising, from issues of affordability and vacancy to equity in every sense of that word. Over years and decades, coupled with zoning and financing constraints and the weight of history, we have arrived at a moment in time where our cityscapes are more pregnant with promise than ever, but saddled with restraints. Because of this, an old idea to produce a more equitable outcome and promise, such as land value taxation, is gaining new currency everywhere. Tonight, we are going to ask if a land value tax can revitalize Chicago. This is the question that we will organize our conversation around. Now, to help us explore and answer this question, we will be joined by John Norquist, the former mayor of Milwaukee, author of The Wealth of Cities, and former president and CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism, who will speak to us about how you can unlock the value of land to unlock opportunity for cities. Then an expert panel, you can see the names here, will come together to explore the application of an LVT and other innovative financing mechanisms, what those tools could mean for Chicago. This is your Thursday, this is your Tax in the City, and now to warm up the crowd and make zoning code, he promises to make zoning code more laughable than it already is. We're going to welcome urbanist comic Alex Montero to the stage.
All right, hey Chicago, how's everybody doing tonight? I want to ask, is anybody here from out of town? Okay, a couple of folks. Thank you, including some of the guests that we have tonight who are going to speak to land value tax. For those who haven't told you yet, leave your ketchup at the door, and don't forget to kiss the bean on your way out. Now, tonight we are standing, and let's give a shout out to our hosts for the evening, the I.O. Theater in Chicago. How many people have been at I.O. before? Hands in the ground? Yeah, there you go. This is one of Chicago's premier improv comedy theaters, right? Comedy minds from all over the country have been coming here to hone their craft and become good entertainers. Some alumni will probably ring a bell. Stephen Colbert, Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, Tim Meadows, Danny Pudi. All of these people came to class here and performed on these stages, which is pretty damn cool. And on any given night, you can see the next generation of comedians in the US getting their start here and putting on their shows. For instance, just tonight, we have the Sketch Lab Showcase, where the writers being trained at I.O. are putting on their sketches and doing dry runs for shows like SNL. We have the amazing comedy duo Underdog Improv, brother and sister, fully improvised show with just the two of them. And we have a panel on property tax reform. Despite the name of this event, this is not a parody of the early 2000s show starring Sarah Jessica Parker. You won't be seeing tonight a racist and sexy show about the deep lives of 4 IRS agents trying to make it in DC, as appealing as that would be. Now, we do have some great panelists who are going to come up and be telling us about their experience. We have a PhD in public policy, we have a mathematician, we have an economist, we have a former mayor, and we have a candidate for Cook County commissioner. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be getting fashion tips from them or tips on how to handle the emotional hurt of a long-distance relationship. So come back for other nights for that kind of programming. We are contractually obligated, though, to include some elements of comedy in the program to be able to use I.O. here. And so, fortunately, I was in town and they gave me a call. And it can be tricky to thread the needle of combining finance and comedy or entertainment, right? People who are tax experts don't have a reputation for having the biggest sense of humor. I do a lot of housing advocacy, right? And my accountant was not enthused when I sent him all my mortgage statements from the past year with a sticky that said market research on them. The auditors laughed even less. But this is something that's been done before. Any Lin-Manuel Miranda fans here in the audience? Yeah? There we go. Yes, yes, thank you. I'd love to see it. So Lin-Manuel Miranda has basically made a career. The thing that launched his career was making musicals about scrappy immigrants with a head for numbers and obsessed with legacy, like Usnavi. Yes, Hamilton from Hamilton, there you go. And also Usnavi from In the Heights prior. It follows a similar kind of formula, right? But, you know, 2 isn't enough. I think Lin-Manuel needs a 3rd one to close out the trilogy. And I think there's an underrated American hero that he should celebrate in the next musical he puts together. Now, I've been workshopping this a little bit, but I think it has legs. And let's see what you think. How does an Italian postal clerk, son of a broke family in Parma, get off the boat in Boston with no credit and no karma, with nothing in his pockets but $2 and a dream, managed to concoct history's best financial scheme, made bank manager by 30 till the economy got wrecked, then spent some time in prison for cashing a fraud check. When he got out, he started a fund to make investments, and people trusted him in his capital assessments. Money came in from Paul and went to pay Peter, and as the pyramid grew, the interest got sweeter. Even when folks catching on to his cons, he never gave up, because he's the great Charles Ponzi. Do it, Lin-Manuel. He's the hero that America definitely doesn't need, but probably deserves at this point. Now, we of course here are going to be talking about land value tax and the ideas of Henry George, who took his, I'd say, tips on beard and hair from the Ben Bernanke School of Styling. In fact, you could replace the name on the plate and nobody would know. Henry George is an interesting character. He was considered in his time to be one of the foremost economists in the world, definitely the most famous American economist in the world. Besides land value tax, he really explored and popularized and wrote a lot of the ideas that we take for granted today. Things like the secret ballot in elections, right? Things like the concept of public utilities. This guy even ran for mayor of New York twice, and the first time he didn't win, but he came out ahead of a young Teddy Roosevelt, which is pretty impressive. And despite all of that curriculum, which gives you a lot to be jealous of, the main thing I'm thinking is, you know, why doesn't my beard look as good as this guy's? That's the secret that I want to know and uncover. Now, I think there's a number of people in this room who would consider themselves urbanists of some variety or another. Yes? Good, these are my people. This combines, checks a lot of boxes of things I'm involved in. And the thing with being an urbanist, that term is thrown around a lot, and increasingly these days. Everyone has a different definition for it. My definition is pretty simple. An urbanist is someone who likes cities and doesn't apologize for cities. We recognize that there are problems with cities, we recognize that there are issues, but we love cities for what they are. And we are okay and with some of the inevitable trade-offs that come with living in a city, and we want to celebrate them, and we want them to be available for the people who want to live in them. Now, there's a lot of people who say that they love cities, and then all the ifs come in, right? I love cities and I think cities are great if I have my own driveway, if the parking is free, if I never have to interact with anybody who makes me uncomfortable. And at that point you don't really like cities, which is fine. What you like is the idea of a shorter commute and being closer to your favorite museum. So for those of us who really like cities and consider ourselves urbanists, there are different varieties of urbanists that make up this cool movement and this cool ecosystem, right? I mean, to begin with, you have the rail fans, right? The train nerds. Any train nerds in the house tonight? Yeah? All railroads lead to Chicago, so it's a pretty good bet. Now, these are the folks, and I include myself in this category, who grew up to the soothing sounds of Ringo Starr narrating Thomas the Tank Engine. We built model sets. We know the HO scale of trains very intimately. And as we grew up, we didn't grow out of our obsession with trains. We grew into it and needed more closer to life, one-to-one scales of vehicles to actually ride in. Chicago is a really good city to be a rail fan, not just because this is the center of the National Railroad Network, but also because we have the L Network, which takes you and gives you a scenic view of the best neighborhoods in America. Like the Epcot monorail has nothing on the CT. You have your Yimbies, of course. Any Yimbies in the audience? Yes, in my backyard. To Yimbies, the biggest problem with cities is that all of their friends haven't moved in next to them. These are folks who are going to manifest creating the urban fabric of Barcelona and/or Tokyo and/or Amsterdam, or die trying. They're really passionate about housing, they're really passionate about neighborhoods, and altruistically, they want more people to experience the things cities have to offer. And you can find them very often at any public meeting, trying really hard not to pop a blood vessel in their head because someone from a neighborhood association just compared legalizing duplexes to Stalinism. You have your cyclists, of course, right? And your cyclists are kind of the paramilitary wing of urbanism. Cyclists have a reputation for being opinionated people, and it's really easy to make fun of them for that, but they have a point. It's easy to be for street safety, but when you're on major roads and streets and arterials every day, that is real to you. The safety is not just a statistic, it's something you've experienced and had very many close calls before. Cyclists have seen the face of death, and it is a Dodge Ram that does not use turn signals. And cyclists are some of the best organized anarchists out there. If you want something done, call a cyclist. If you want something moved, call a cyclist with a cargo license. And then finally, of course, you have your urban economics nerds, right? Which, yes, there we go. These are the folks who see cities as ecosystems, right? They love cities not just for the aesthetic pieces, not just for the lifestyle choices, but really see them as engines of opportunity, as places where people come to do things and meet people and have conversations that are really hard to have anywhere else in the world. All of that is a really poetic way of saying that these are people who can look at sewer maintenance projections for 12 hours straight and know more about property taxes than anybody, which is part of why we're here to listen today. Now, the thing you'll find is that these are not necessarily separate people. You have a gateway drug into urbanism, which is one of these categories, but once you start getting involved, you see that all of this is connected. Land use is connected to safe streets. Transit is connected to economic growth. And all of these areas play together in interesting ways. So even though a lot of you here in the audience tonight will consider yourselves cyclists or rail nerds or Yimbies or any of these other categories, I encourage you to be open-minded tonight and think about how some of the topics that we're talking about fit into the areas that you already care about and are passionate about. To quote Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. And I think you'll find that by the end of this, you may start developing a new burning, nerdy passion for the enigma that is property taxes. So with that, I'm going to pass it back off to Ben. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Maybe we should do like an LVT comedy tour. Take this to Vegas, get Carrot Top in the mix with Henry George bobbleheads. All right, little note of housekeeping. We're going to hear from John Norquist in just a moment, and then we'll bring our panel up. But we also want to hear from all of you. So if this cooperates, yes. You can scan that QR code and you can submit questions for the panel, whether in advance now, whether as thoughts arise. All right, so we've had a little fun, but it's time to get serious. And before we bring John Norquist to the stage, taxation is a very vexing issue. And to help us really understand what a land value tax is, how it works, we have two experts here tonight from Chicago Public Schools. So I want to introduce Goldie and Fran to come up to the stage. make sure these mics are on. Say hello.
Hello.
Yeah?
Hello.
All right.
Hello. Okay.
All right. Hello. Okay, so it took me forever to really figure out and understand what tax is all about. But I think we're going to get to the root of it. Now, Goldie, can you tell me what a tax is?
It's money you use to pay the government.
Okay, gotcha. Franny, what do you get for paying a tax?
Streets and school.
Okay, streets, schools, stuff. It's pretty good. Goldie, now if you own a piece of land and you build a house on it, what happens to your taxes?
They go up.
They go up. Okay. And if you own a piece of land, Goldie, and you leave it completely empty, just leave it sitting there, what happens to your taxes?
They stay low.
Fran, does that make sense?
No.
Why not?
Because the person with the house makes things better.
They do make things better, you're right. They make things better for themselves and for the neighborhood, for everyone around them. And then they have to pay even more.
That's backwards.
It is backwards. So Goldie, what if instead of taxing the building, we tax the land, just the ground itself?
Then more people would buy things on the land.
They would build things on the land, that's right. That sounds pretty good. And Fran, do you think we could put more houses and apartments on that land?
Of course, and don't forget aquariums.
Aquariums too. Okay. So, girls, Chicago has over 30,000 empty lots. What should we do about it?
Tax the land, not property.
Franny, why?
So there are more buildings and less vacant lots.
It doesn't seem that complicated, does it?
It's not. Tax the land, not buildings. Not copying it.
Goldie and Fran breaking it down. Thank you. Well, there you have a case closed. Oh, we have one more quick comment. All right, we'll see if our next guest has anything to add. As mayor of Milwaukee for 16 years, John Norquist transformed that city through a variety of economic development strategies and prescient planning initiatives that are continuing to unlock Milwaukee's potential. He became one of the first American mayors to tear out a highway, the Park East Freeway, and replace it with a boulevard that thereby freed up the land to be built upon and be tax producing. As president and CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism, he led the National Highways to Boulevards initiative, pushed for federal housing finance reform to stop subsidizing sprawl, and established the idea of traditional urbanism as the default model for town and city building everywhere. It was there, also as my boss, that he really exposed me to many more German beer hall songs, so I thank him for that. He is the author of the book, The Wealth of Cities, and has been advocating for building better places longer than most of us have been paying attention. Please welcome to the stage, John Norquist.
Great reveal. I already got enough of a 10. All right. Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you to your daughters. And it's a pleasure to be with you to talk about urbanism and the role that land value taxation has on what urbanism looks like, how much urbanism we get. And it's the lack of land value taxation, the taxation heavily of improvements, houses and apartments, and factories and whatever, has all kinds of side effects that undermine the economy of cities. When I became mayor in 1988 in Milwaukee, most of the discussion about cities was about pathology. You know, cities that were troubled and declining, and all these different words were used. And it also went back to when Lyndon Johnson created HUD, which when they first came up with the name, it was the Department of Urban Development. So it was DUD. They finally figured that one out and made it HUD. But the problem with HUD, which I think they're aware of at this, well, we're not aware of much of anything at this point, but when there were people there, some of them Republicans, that, so I'm not trying to be overly partisan here. Well, I was properly partisan just a minute ago. But the idea that cities were somehow something to feel sorry for was disgusting and inappropriate, and it wasn't productive. It didn't make anything better. So in the 90s, things started to change. Maybe they started to change in the late 80s, but yeah, that's right. I got elected in '88. So, but there was a lot of that attitude. When I became mayor of Milwaukee, there were really just 3 developers that did anything in Milwaukee of any significance in terms of residential. Most of the developers were just doing things in the suburbs. But I didn't think that was the right situation. So how do we change that? And all 3 of these developers were constantly showing up at City Hall and saying there was a gap and that they couldn't build anything in Milwaukee unless the city paid them to do it. So I had a developer come into my office who hadn't done anything yet. He was some Russian guy named Boris Gukov. Yeah. Anyway, and he doesn't know Trump, but, very well. But anyway, he came in and he said he wanted to buy a city parking lot in one of the wealthier neighborhoods in the east side of Milwaukee, and he said, I just want to buy it. I don't need to be part of the subsidy. I don't need that. And I don't have a lobbyist. I said, good, we'll sell it to you. And then he developed apartments without any money from the city at all, because he saw the value. Of course, where he was doing it was near Lake Michigan. There was no reason to subsidize it under any circumstances. And so we tried that, and we stopped subsidizing things in the downtown and let the value express itself through the market. I had a developer, after the urban renaissance started to form, a guy came in from the suburbs who had done suburban apartments, the ones with the parking lot around the outside, and maybe a little bit of lawn. And he wanted to build one, and he wanted to build it on Prospect Avenue, which looks over Lake Michigan. So it'd be like doing something in Lincoln Park. And he brought in a lobbyist who worked for one of these 3 developers that had always been coming into the city, and the developer said, Mayor, I'd just been elected a year or so before that. Mayor, we came to this end of the hall to see what we could get.
Yeah.
And we're going to go to the other end. After we talk to you, we're going to go to the other end of the hall and see what we can get down there. And I felt like Michael Corleone. I said, I'll tell you what you're going to get. Nothing. Nothing. And he started to pack up his bags. And I looked at the developer and I said, except this, I'll give you one thing. What's that? I'll give you all your permits in 3 months. except the plumbing permit, that's harder to get. We had 3 guys there and they had a union, local 75. Couldn't hurry them too much. But they cooperated eventually. But anyway, so then he said, I'll take that. And the lobbyist is sitting there, I said, yeah, no subsidy. I'll tell you why no subsidy, because I don't think we should have to bribe you, to do development in the city. What do you think, we're some shithole? The only reason anybody come here is if they get paid to be here? Because if that's the attitude, then why are we doing anything? It's ridiculous. So the developer was very cooperative. He built the building. I'd like to tell you he made millions of dollars, but he sold it after a few years and maybe at a loss. But the next developer did fine. Okay, so the reason I bring that up is that real estate is a market, cities are a market, and city living is something that a lot of people have learned to like. And some people in Chicago never had to learn it because they already knew it. And in Milwaukee and New York, my sister lives in the Bronx. She had a husband who passed away, 8 years ago, but Puerto Rican guy's jazz musician, and they bought a house in the Bronx 20 years ago. Not a house, but it was an apartment on the 6th floor near Montefiore Hospital, and it had 3 bedrooms, and they paid $90,000 for it. And my sister just sold it a few months ago for $600,000. Okay, so she had an investment. But why does it cost so much money? Why would it cost so much money to do that? Well, one of the reasons is that the tax system is contorted to end up with more money in speculation. My sister wasn't trying to speculate. She just took advantage of other people's speculation. Yeah. But they're holding land, and that was Henry George's whole thing. That speculators eat up all the profit, and then. But the bad thing for cities isn't just that. I mean, speculation. Put down a bet. Buy a lottery ticket. Whatever. People speculate all the time. But the effect it has on the urban environment when you have land, the value of land goes up, it drives up the cost of the houses, but the land value isn't taxed. So, I just dropped my notes just a second. I'm back. Now I have to do one other adjustment. The glass is out here. Okay. All right, so Henry George, Progress and Poverty. He really took the ideas of Adam Smith and David Ricardo that were great economists of 100 years before that and popularized them and came up with this great idea of a single tax, which ends up not being exactly how you want to describe this stuff, the single tax, but it became popular because of his book, and he wasn't, as it was pointed out, he never won an election, but he did come close in New York in 1896. But he had so he wasn't very good at politics, but he was popular. His book was very popular, and he took the ideas of Adam Smith, which almost nobody knew anything about, because, well, they're economists, And so, but his ideas have had a steady and growing support amongst a broad category of people, a broad category of economists, but not everybody else. The economists know all about it. They swear by it. A lot of them, and from all over the spectrum. Besides, Milton Friedman said that the least bad tax of all would be a tax on land. And then Paul Krugman loves the land tax, value tax. He has caveat, he thinks it wouldn't raise enough money, but I'll get to that in a minute. Joe Stiglitz. So those are 3 Nobel Prize winners. Joe Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, and Milton Friedman. And I've met all 3 of them, actually. My wife has met all 3 of them. We were with Stiglitz at some sort of fancy convention out in New Mexico. Tom Piketty, the guru of the last 10 years or so in terms of progressive tax policy, he thinks that having land value taxation would reduce inequality in economics, in income, and in wealth. So it's widespread, but there are caveats about how to deal with it. It's popular with economists, but not well known from other people. It is something that sometimes people that are totally obsessed with it get so obsessed with it, it's hard for people to take it as seriously as they should. And so the strategies have to be fine-tuned to fit into political culture so that people can be convinced that it's a good idea. The other thing you need to know is that it exists, and that it's in New Zealand, it's in Australia, it's in some of the European countries in various forms. Almost nowhere is it a single tax, so that's what I mean about that slogan not being necessarily the best way to do it. Because it's hard for people to envision all the other, particularly tax collectors. I mean, where would the money come from? And that's what Paul Krugman's caveat is. Well, would it raise enough money to support health care, Social Security, all these things? Well, no, not by itself, but, and maybe some other taxes that aren't even related to value taxation, land value taxation. But there are other things that could be considered like land value taxation. Alaska has an oil bonus that goes to every citizen of Alaska gets, you know, sometimes it's a big check every year in money that's been collected from the oil companies. And that is basically functions like a land value tax. What is charged for water, particularly in the western states that have water shortages? That is a more appropriate tax than other taxes because it's a shortage and you need to, now everybody needs water, so you might need to develop a way to deal with low income situations. But all of these things are like land value tax and minerals. The iron ore, oil, gas, rare earth. Everybody hears about rare earth, but very few people know that it's really not that rare. Anyway, all right, so the land value tax is everything that Henry George was saying. It's a great idea. People that know a lot about it know it's a great idea. So how do you sell it? And I think that a lot of politicians have no opinion of it whatsoever, more than are against it. People that are against it usually are against it because they think that it might change things for the worse. They don't know. And if you owned a big parking lot, surface parking lot, yeah, you should either sell it. If you had a land value tax, you probably want to sell it because you're going to be paying taxes more than you're going to get from the parking. So, so anyway, how do you do it? Well, you don't have to have it cover everything. In Pennsylvania, there's 20 cities with land value tax, and all of them are partial. None of them are 100%. And some of them are almost 100% because they gradually, they love it, the people get used to it, they like it. People that were afraid of it experience it. And it's gone up in some places, it's 82% of the taxes that are collected are land. That's the highest one. Nobody's gotten to 100, but so what? You still get the benefits of it. And so you need to use these gradual systems. Another thing you need to do, and I did this, there was a woman on the southwest side of Milwaukee named Scheinflug, Ruth Scheinflug. And she had geraniums and petunias, and her lawn, you know, was just perfect. Little edges cut on the sidewalk, you've seen that. You know, her roof was perfect, everything, you know, she kept everything in perfect repair. And she said, what's this, you were talking about land tax, they're just doing it on the land. What good is that? I said, well, you know that slob on the end of the block? The guy that doesn't clean his windows, and there's a hole in his garage door, and you know, all this stuff. And he doesn't mow the lawn, he doesn't do anything. Well, now it's okay not to mow the lawn. My wife and I have a natural lawn, so you know, we have to be proud of that. But back in those days, her and her neighbor, Mrs. Shemilevsky, they kept their yards perfect. So I would, with Mrs. Shemilevsky, I'd say, Dzień dobry, jak się masz? You know, we have a great conversation. But the thing they need to understand is that people that don't take care of the property or don't get any, don't put effort into it, they're getting away with low taxes and you're paying high taxes. Once they understand that, then it starts to come together. And then if you start it, like if you're, let's say you're from Rockford, Illinois, and you get elected alderman, or mayor, or whatever. If you lobby and you get the state to make it easier to have a land value tax, then you put it in, you make it, you know, a land value tax at say 20%. The state allows you to charge more on land than you would on you know, make it higher than it is. And in Wisconsin, when I was in the state legislature, I was the chairman of the finance committee, and we had a bill that that included something the State Assessors Association had put in the bill to eliminate land, which is at 10%. It was a fixed percentage. It actually should have been a different way, or just give the local governments a chance to deal with it themselves. And I had power. I was chairman of the committee, came in. My colleagues on the finance committee didn't care about the issue very much one way or the other, which is what most legislators are not against land value taxation. They just don't know anything about it. You know, it's sort of like with you know, Peter Lorre in Casablanca goes up to Humphrey Bogart and says, Rick, you despise me, don't you? And Bogart says, well, I suppose if I ever thought about you, I would. So anyway, I just said, well, I want this out. I care about it. You guys don't. Out it went. And the people, the head of it was from Beloit, Wisconsin, in Rock County. And she came into my office and hugged me and said, that's so great you did that. I said, well, it wasn't hard to do it, but you know, we've got a lot of work to do for people to understand it, what it's all about. And it is. It's, you know, it's something that's a change, and people are afraid of change. And so anyway, I just want to end with this idea that you can change things, and you can do things that seem almost impossible. An example of that is in Minneapolis. And I'm not talking about the trauma that they've all gone to. I'm talking about something really good that's happened over the last 3, 4, or 5 years. Omar, who's supposed to be the most left-wing controversial member of the Congress, she and a Republican by the name of Chuck Marone from Brainerd Brainerd, Minnesota. I used to live in Red Lake Falls, Minnesota, which was closer to Winnipeg than Brainerd, and closer to Winnipeg than Minneapolis. But anyway, he got together with Omar, and they had a presentation, press conference, campaigning for loosening up the zoning and allowing people to add a garage apartment or put if they're a single-story house, to put a second story on as a duplex, or to have a granny flat, or to have a grandpa flat, whatever. Anyway, but you can have up to 4 units by right. And when they first came out with that, they weren't the ones who first mentioned it, but when the proponents of it came out, it was like, you want to do what? Not in my neighborhood. But then, the idea just kept percolating. You don't have to do it. Your neighbors don't have to do it. You can talk them out of it if you wanted, but what if you want to have your aunt or somebody live in a little unit behind, or somebody live above your garage? What, do you want to be prohibited from doing that? You don't want to be trusted, to make your own decisions? It's not like we're going to build 30-story building. Although in the downtown, you can build a 30-story apartment building in Minneapolis by right. And they've added 12% to their housing units, the number of units in Minneapolis in the last 6 years. 12% in a city that everybody said was declining. It used to be declining population, now it's growing with population, even with all the trauma that they had to go through. So anyway, they won, and that's spreading. It spread to St. Paul. Right across it's spreading around the country. And there's a guy running for state senate. Ben, who's that guy that's running for Congress, and he's a state senator?
Scott Wiener.
Yeah.
Scott Wiener, yeah.
Yeah, okay, you heard it from him. I but anyway, his state senator is running for Congress, and he's the guy that got the law change in California to make it easier, which passed, which made it easier to have accessory units. Because you can't have a growing city without having a real estate market that can actually function. I mean, I'm not a rabid capitalist, but without, even the communist Chinese have figured out that capitalism is part of the picture. That's why they're surging ahead. They realize that wind power and solar power are assets to the economy, and that's why their AI will be able to plug in. Whereas IAI is going to plug into what? Some sludge pot in West Virginia? I mean, come on. Okay, so there's other speakers, there's other people that have a right to be heard tonight, so I don't want to go too long. But I want to tell you that these things you can win on, you can make them more public issues, make aldermen, state reps, state senators take it seriously, and push it. It's good for the city, it's good for the suburbs, it's good for the farmland. Believe it or not, it takes pressure off farmers that are worried about losing their farms. Of course, when you say to the farmer, well, should we outlaw, protect your farmland permanently? And well, no, I might want to sell it later. But my cousin Kurt is a farmer up in Minnesota, so I know what the attitudes are, at least that he has. So anyway, you can win. You stick together. You talk about it. The fact that there's a bigger crowd here tonight. I've been to LTVs. I went to an LTV meeting in Beloit where there was supposed to be Fanatic, and there were like 12 people. So we can win. Or as we say in our neighborhood, venceremos. Okay.
John Norquist. All right. So you've probably heard LVT referred to as the perfect tax. And Fran has more to say about that. You've probably heard LVT referred to as the perfect tax. And there's a lot of momentum where people are recognizing what the power is embedded in that phrase. And we're going to get our panel up now to discuss where this momentum is being felt, what the application might be here in Chicago. There are bills pending in the state of New York. There is LVT activity happening in Maryland, in Maine, all across the country. More and more people are aware of the application of LVT. So to go a little bit further into what LVT can do, and to bring our panel to the stage, I want to introduce the Executive Director of the Progress and Poverty Institute, Josie Faust.
Can I just say this is so exciting now? Tax people, what? I've been with PPI for 7 years, and I can tell you 7 years ago, no way in hell this would have happened. So I love seeing y'all out here. As Ben said, I am the Executive Director of the Progress and Poverty Institute. By the name, you can guess, LVT is kind of our thing. We have other things, this is kind of our major thing. So with that, I want to go ahead and call the panelists up. If Daryl and Drake and Greg would like to come up. And before we get started with the panel, I'm going to channel my inner teacher, because I'll do that too, and ask y'all to look at the pamphlets that were in your seat. So one of the things about LVT is that it seems really like convoluted and hard to understand, but it's actually really, really simple. So please take these with you. But I'm going to draw your attention to this part right here with the equations with no numbers, okay? Because what I want to do is just inoculate you in the confidence that you understand what this is. So how many of you know how property taxes are calculated? Nope. Fair enough. Okay. Fair. That's fair. All right. So I'm going to give you the quick and dirty version. So basically, every taxing jurisdiction employs somebody whose job it is to determine what every parcel of property in the jurisdiction is worth, the land value and the improvement value. Here in Cook County, who's your assessor? Do you guys know? It's Fritz. He's awesome, right? He's awesome. I'm not going to touch that one. As somebody from New Jersey, he's really super cool. New Jersey. Woo! All right. Anyway, so your assessor, that's their entire job, right? Is to determine the value of properties, whether or not they're being transacted, and to do their best possible job to try to get to that market rate. So if I were going to sell my home, what would I probably get for it? That's their entire job. Once they have determined that value, that's the improvement value here in that top formula, they then, oh, I'm sorry, what am I doing? Oh, good Lord. The total value is improvement plus land. Improvements are buildings, land is, yes, land, right? They sum those two things, they get the total property value, they multiply it by a single tax rate. This is how property taxes are calculated on almost every place in the country, right? And we'll hear probably about some places that do it a little bit differently. But that's that top equation. So that's simple algebra, right? And that gives you your tax bill. Do that across the millions of parcels in Cook County and you get everybody's tax bill, right? LVT is almost the exact same thing. So you're still using an assessment, you're still getting the value of improvements and of land, but rather than just using that one tax rate like we see at the top, you have two. And the key here is that the higher tax rate, so that the burden goes on the land value. The lower rate goes on the improvement value. That's literally all LVT is. It's a little bit of math. You guys feel more like, okay, I think I can now internalize everything else that's going to be said. Okay, awesome. So that's it. Please keep the brochures, and they have more detail in there, but we're going to talk you through some of this now. So let me introduce our first panelist. This is Dr. Daryl Fairweather. She's a leading voice on the U.S. housing economy, currently the chief economist at Redfin, and a member of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas Academic Advisory Council. She draws on her experience as a former senior economist at Amazon to analyze market trends. Daryl is a contributor to Forbes, the author of Hate the Game, Economic Cheat Codes for Life, Love, and Work. Her expertise has been showcased by major outlets, including the New York Times, Bloomberg, and 60 Minutes. Daryl, what are the economics of LVT?
Oh, this is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about because I can just nerd out on economics. So the thing you need to know is that there are three main inputs. That's not my phone. Is this working? touch that? What happened? Now we got a new mic. Thank you. Okay, is this one working? I can show you. This one's working. All right, let me give you that. This one down. Okay, so the thing to know about what drives the economy. There are three main inputs into economic productivity, economic activity. You have labor, which is everything that people do to make the economy run. You have capital, which traditionally was thought of as everything that's not labor, like machines, buildings. But what Henry George figured out is that land is different from other forms of capital because you can't create land. Nobody makes land. Land is always there. And when you have taxes, if you tax labor, people tend to work less. If you have an income tax, they may be discouraged from working because they're not taking home as much pay. And since they work less, you get less economic activity. That's called deadweight loss. If you tax investments, if you tax buildings, if you tax capital gains, people invest less, they build less. But if you tax land, nothing gets distorted in the economy. The land will be there whether it is taxed or not. And this is why economists call land tax the perfect tax, the best tax, the least bad tax, because there is no downside to the economy from taxing it. So that's one reason to love land value tax as an economist. Now, I'm a housing economist, so how does this relate to housing? Well, as you pointed out, we have taxes that treat buildings the same way that we treat land. And because we are taxing buildings and homes, we are not getting enough homes built. And this is one of the reasons why housing has gotten so unaffordable, is because builders are not incentivized to actually build, they are incentivized to hold their land vacant or to not do anything with their land to avoid getting hit with a higher property tax, because property tax is land plus the building. So if you want to make housing more affordable, one way to do that is to shift the burden of taxes off of the houses and on to the underlying land. So that's another reason to love land value tax. Another reason, which is not about economic productivity or housing, it's about equality, is that in this country, we tend to put the burden of taxes onto people who don't have as much of an ability to pay. We aren't taxing land as much as we are taxing income or investments, and that's bad for economic productivity, but it's also bad for the people who don't own land. And this is very much tied back to our history and how our economy was set up. Like, before the Fair Housing Act, Black people did not have access to home ownership the way that white people did. So they do not own as many homes, they don't own as much land. And a good example is that back in 1932, Mississippi changed its tax structure to take taxes off of property, off of land, and put it onto sales tax. And they were able to effectively put the tax burden on their Black residents and take it off of their white residents, because most of these landowners were white because of the racist history that was in that state. And that's kind of an extreme example, but you see that all across the country, that landowners are not paying their fair share in taxes compared to everyone else. And this creates inequality for Black versus white, indigenous versus white. I mean, indigenous people had the land in the first place and it was taken away. And also for immigrants, because immigrants coming to this country are not coming in as landowners, they are working and they're the ones getting taxed. So that's 3 reasons why you should be in favor of a land value tax. It's good for the economy, it's good for housing, and it reduces inequality. And I could talk forever. I made a YouTube video about it that's 20 minutes long if you want to check it out, but I'll let the other panelists talk.
All right, thank you so much, Daryl. Drake. This is Drake Warren. Drake is an industrial engineer and housing policy advocate. On March 17th, he became the Democratic nominee for Cook County Commissioner in which serves much of Chicago's northern lakefront and portions of Chicago's far northwest side. He seeks to use his platform as an incoming elected official to advance policies to improve Chicago's built environment, financial health, transportation, and walkability. Drake, what attracted you to LVT as a future public servant?
All right, is this microphone working? Thanks so much for having me. I spent most of the last year talking to people in some form or another. I don't think I've ever been on a panel before. This is still a first. Land value tax appeals to me because of some of the origins of why I ran in the first place. I'm an urbanist of the YIMBY flavor that Alex mentioned, and I fit that description to a T so much that when I moved to Chicago, I dragged with me 2 of my best friends for back home, and I haven't stopped evangelizing Chicago since then. Part of why I ran in the first place is I think Chicago and Chicagoans richly deserve a renaissance. I think we've made a horrible misstep of ceasing to build our city like a city. This is a city that reversed the flow of the river, invented the skyscraper, hoisted the entirety of downtown to install a sewer system. And this is a city that used to not be stopped by the laws of physics with those projects, and now we're bogged down in community meetings with block clubs to build a 2-flat, and I think that's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts for our city. I also really hate getting dunked on by Europe. I think we should be building Chicago so well that Amsterdam and Copenhagen take their notes from us and not the other way around. So for a Chicago Renaissance, that has to include big changes to the built environment. I'd like it to include a growing population. It's really unfortunate that we're looking at roughly the population we had a century ago. With much fewer cars back then, by the way, and that we're down nearly 1 million people from our peak. I think a renaissance means a resurgence, of course, of culture, of livability, and these are all aided by land value tax. It incentivizes more productive use of land so that we can have a growing population once more. If you want arts and culture, you had better have a city where artists and creatives can afford to live. It's the increased supply. It's great for cost of living to welcome in more artists and creatives. It's also better for equity, and to your point, goes away to heal some of the horribly segregated history we have here in Chicago. We here in Chicago had this racist triple whammy of redlining, of land sale contracts, which effectively scammed many people of color out of home ownership, as well as during the initial FHA loan process, loans were only available to white people. And that's not damage that goes away on its own. It has to be actively healed, and land value tax is one of the policies that can go a long way to help heal that. Yeah, that basically sums up land value tax. And lastly, I'm excited to work toward that on the county board, both in my actual ability to introduce ordinances that get us parts of the way toward land value tax, as well as to launch the discussion and the movement that's going to be required to enact change at the state level to fully implement land value tax here.
Thanks, Greg. And we have Greg Miller. Greg is the co-founder and director of the Center for Land Economics. He previously founded a tenant association in South Bend before serving as a program analyst for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or DUD, as we just learned it was originally called. Greg, can you talk to us about the current state of LVT advocacy and legislation across the country?
Yes, that's probably the one thing I can contribute. We've had a good host of people speaking. A few years ago, there were maybe a couple of states considering legislation. In the past year, we've seen 10 states introduce legislation that would allow cities to shift tax burden off of buildings and onto the value of land. That's a huge momentum shift, and we're not just seeing cities introduce this or states introduce this. We're seeing Virginia pass legislation to enable 4 cities. We're seeing Kentucky pass legislation almost unanimously in the Republican legislature as part of a larger bill that would enable their metro councils to enable these policies or pass these policies. We're seeing genuine interest. I think the better question is why, right? And so this isn't just this big idea. We have $50 trillion of land in our economy. Why do we privatize it, right? That's a big idea, but it's also a practical solution to the housing crisis we're seeing today. Department of Housing and Urban Development, DUD, we focus a lot on the $60 billion annually that the Housing and Urban Development gives out, and how can we stack these capital stacks to make affordable housing for this one project, right? Meanwhile, our urban environments are collecting almost $1 trillion in property taxes every year. So if you're going to think about what's really shaping incentives in our cities, we have to look at the tax that we're doing on buildings. and ask how we can fix those incentives. And I think that we're seeing right now for the first time, a century ago, our cities were the densest they've ever been. And we built these beautiful things called automobiles and roads, and we started moving outwards. For the first time in a century, the average American is starting to live in a denser area decade over decade than before. And so when we ask where the housing crisis is coming from, actually, we have the same amount of housing units per capita as ever, meaning that we can house the same amount of people. But what we don't have is the housing units where people want them most, in our urban cores. So this isn't a housing crisis, it's a land crisis. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize this. This is an urban land crisis. Where people want to live, we have surface parking lots or underdeveloped units. And so I think that's why a lot of people are looking around asking, what can we do next? It's one thing to upzone, that's very important, but how can we actually incentivize the development that we want to see, so that way people can have the cities they want to see, the development they want to see, and live in the places they want to be. And so I think that we're only going to see this movement grow. I think YIMBYs are getting on board. I think Strong Towns people, if you're going to be a Strong Towns national gathering, join us. We will be there. But I think that's why we're starting to see a lot of people take this up. It's a practical solution, not just a big idea.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, I basically live at conferences, and one of my least favorite things is when the moderator asks their own questions, because I don't need to be doing that. So on my phone, I have your questions, or some of them. Whoever's doing slides, can you put the QR code back up for if folks have more questions? So I'm going to read your questions. All right, this one has some curse words in it, so I'm going to, because there's children in the audience, so I'm just going to switch this around a little bit, but you get the idea. Why are NIMBYs such related? On a scale of 1 to 10, how aggressive would the lobbying opposition be to LBT? And we're going to say 1 being the lowest end of that spectrum and 10 being the highest.
I will start because I do this work on the ground in all the states that are introducing legislation. I'm probably having some sort of conversation. PPI is as well. Quite frankly, I think because it's the practical solution to a problem, a lot of the time it's just educating people. The apartment association, this is a great policy for apartments. They see a lot of decrease in property taxes. But if you're not ahead of getting in conversation with them, they might see a tax bill and come out and say, uh-oh, we don't believe this is in our best interest, because anytime we're talking about taxes, people are just trying to tax us more. And so it's a lot about just building the right coalition. And I think that's why we saw Virginia and Kentucky be able to pass these bills. That's not to say, in Colorado we didn't build the right coalition. We had 38 people come out against in opposition and only 4 people for it, right? We didn't do the right groundwork there. And so it really is about doing a lot of that right groundwork. Because if you do the right groundwork and you get the right people on board, you pitch it the right way to them, you'll see that a lot of people actually stand to gain, a lot of associations stand to gain. But sometimes you'll have developers come out against this. There's 2 types of developers in cities. There's a developer who owns a lot of land. There's a developer who develops a lot of land, right? And so one will like it and one won't. And so when we work in these cities, sometimes there'll be a developer who's in love with what we're doing, and sometimes there'll be a developer who's really pushing back. And so one is more sympathetic than the other, and oftentimes their city council knows these people and knows which one's more sympathetic than not. And so really, I think that just pitching this as a practical solution and getting ahead of the curve is what's important. There's not to say that there's not opposition, there definitely is, but I think it's worth it to engage what you think is opposition.
Oh yeah, sure, I'll add to this. So my experience with NIMBYs is that they tend to focus on the idea of an apartment building going in their neighborhood. So that's why they're so opposed to things like eliminating single-family zoning. But I think land value tax has an advantage where you can kind of slide it in without necessarily the NIMBYs noticing what's going on. Like just saying, oh, we just want to have a split rate between buildings and land. Like, I don't think NIMBYs would really pick up on how that could densify their neighborhood right away. And you could also structure it so that most homeowners get a tax break, where most of the tax is falling on vacant lots instead of the homeowners that have a home that they maintain. As we talked about before. I mean, it depends on the neighborhood. You kind of have to customize it or not the neighborhood, the city, customize it for each city to make it work. But there is a way, I think, to structure it where you get everyone on board, and that goes back to the economic efficiency part, which is that for every $1 you tax on land, you can reduce taxes on something else by more than $1. So just that math alone, you should be able to build a coalition with that math.
I would say one I think when we think of NIMBYs, we kind of think of like the most heinous, melodramatic, thinly veiled racism NIMBY we've like seen at a community meeting. I think there are a lot of people, one, who are on the fence, who don't like necessarily know the word YIMBY or NIMBY. And then there are others who may be kind of gravitating toward NIMBY who can still absolutely be engaged on reason. And to the points of both of my fellow panelists, I think land value tax does provide a pretty special opportunity to build a broader coalition. One with the left, because it can kind of easily be framed as a, hey, like these landowners should be paying their fair share. And it's also something that would be attractive to the more development heavy side of the developer spectrum. And I think one of the responsibilities I'll have on my plate is building political power across levels of government in a way that won't be stoppable by the speculative side of the development industry.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would say, just as somebody who works in this space as well, you'd be surprised by who really loves this policy. We did some work in Richmond a year or two ago, and the Realtors Association was all over it, which we were like, cool. They didn't like us so much in Philly, but cool. The folks who never ever like us are the folks who own surface parking and vacant lots, and we don't like them either. So. Okay, next question. What social justice issues arise out of the current system that may be solved or improved through land value tax?
There's so many to think of. One is that you could reduce the burden of taxation on people who can't afford to pay those taxes, or you could redistribute the revenue raised from a land value tax to fund programs that reduce inequality. California has very low property taxes. They have Prop 13, which is like the anti-land value tax. And so they have to raise tax revenue through income taxes. And like I said before, income taxes and sales taxes, they can fall on the workers, they fall on people who are spending money. So moving that onto land, you're literally taxing wealth. There's a lot of support for people who care about inequality to tax wealth. Wealth is very hard to measure. It's easy to hide. If you have your wealth stored in art, or you have your wealth stored in stocks, it's hard to put a valuation on that, but you can't hide land. So if you want a type of wealth tax that is going to be easy to measure, easy to implement, then land tax is where you should start.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that. I think one of the things we're seeing, if we're looking just housing particularly, is intergenerational wealth being passed on through housing, particularly from families who started buying homes in 1960 and had kids, and somehow their home is now worth triple what they bought it for, yet they didn't really improve the property. So it's the land that improved, right? And so when we think about these intergenerational wealth issues, when we think about zoning in its particularly pernicious form of ways that, it's formed and it's shaped the land wealth and where land value is, I think we're really looking at a lot of wealth stored in land that has caused intergenerational inequalities, both on race and just also on income in general.
The two things I'll touch on, one is that our current property tax environment is relatively unfriendly toward renters. We have a renter myself. One of those reasons is a lot of the sort of exemptions and deductions we have benefit homeowners in a way that renters have no access to. Land value tax would create an improvement because so many of the apartment buildings, rental units, would wind up seeing a lower burden per unit than they do now. So it would be more equitable for renters who, although there are certainly many housing cost burdened low-income homeowners, a lot of our most vulnerable people are in fact renters. Secondly, and finally, in some of our most poor, low tax base from a property perspective municipalities, they pay extremely high effective tax rates, particularly for things like school districts, which tend to, in Cook County, amount for over 50% of the average person's property tax bill. So a land value tax, which makes vacant land pay its fair share more, provides some relief to those residents, as well as actually encouraging a revitalization and a growing of the tax base, so folks won't be paying such a high effective rate in perpetuity effectively.
Great points. Okay, implementations, question mark. Are there any successful examples of a US city or town that has an LVT system already in place? And what are the before and after results of encouraging vacant property development? Oh, this is such a softball, but I love it.
I think Brett's got it.
I'll take it. Yes, I think we heard from John that Pennsylvania has implemented, more than 20 cities have implemented, only some of them remain, probably 15 of them remain having implemented. Pittsburgh is the most common example. Pittsburgh in the 60s, 70s, 80s is starting to look around, notice a post-industrial trend, and ask how can we ensure vitality while our economy is starting to decline. And so they start ramping up. They look at their property tax system and start shifting the tax burden from buildings to land over time. They really start ratcheting it up in the 80s. And when you look at what Pittsburgh experience was compared to surrounding cities like Cleveland or Baltimore, other post-industrial cities, Pittsburgh fared very well. In 2000, they ended up getting rid of their split rate tax and go back to a property tax system due to some poor assessments, some bad politics at the time. But you still have cities like Harrisburg and Allentown in Pennsylvania which have these split rate taxes. Split rate meaning you're taxing land more than buildings. And a lot of the economic literature suggests that this was a great policy, led to more infill housing development, but also led to overall property values increasing compared to cities and comparable cities that did not implement such policies. And so I think those are good examples, but I think that those are also dated examples, and so I would love for more implementation. I think it's coming.
You got it.
Yes, and just to point out the pamphlet again, there's a kind of list of what those on the ground effects are in there as well. Oh God, okay, well that was a softball, but this one isn't. On advocacy, can you give a step-by-step playbook for establishing a land value tax in Chicago?
No, I can't. It seems like it would require a change to the state constitution, which is not impossible. We have ballot measures that let us convene a constitutional convention, I believe, every presidential cycle. So we'll have an opportunity in 2028 potentially to convene a convention that could include changes that allow for a land value tax. In the meantime, though, the Cook County Board of Commissioners sets the assessment levels, which are effective as close as we come to proactively setting a tax rate on different classes of property. So vacant, residential, commercial. Right now, vacant land is assessed at 10%, residential at 10%, commercial at 25%. Getting vacant land assessed higher would be as simple as introducing an ordinance that says that 10% is now at 25%, and then we vote on it, and we cover the law. And that's something I'll be seeking to implement, and that's kind of our first step. Anything else would require changes to state law or large amounts of intergovernmental collaboration across the hundreds of taxing bodies in Cook County, which is its own issue, in order to somewhat abate the value of structures that when they're assessed. One thing, though, that would aid implementation is our infrastructure for assessing the value of land is good to go. Land is assessed in the current assessment process, basically as its own line item. So that's kind of turnkey, out of the box, ready to accommodate the implementation of land value tax.
One innovative idea I had today is you could raise tax rates overall and then give credits on the building. Rather than, you can't exempt buildings as a city, but Chicago could raise the overall millage rates, but then give a credit on cities, which would overall end up shifting the tax burden, keeping revenue neutral. I don't know how feasible that is, but maybe you can figure it out.
And that's where the intergovernmental collaboration comes from, because Cook County is responsible for the assessment and the collection of the taxes, and then the distribution of the revenue to the hundreds of taxing bodies. So Cook County only is collecting and retaining about 5% of the average tax bill, so it would just require this big collaboration between the other levels of government to kind of reallocate that revenue. But that's something I'm interested in doing to the extent that it can be done, again, between hundreds of taxing bodies, which is a problem that also needs solved.
So one thing, you mentioned that Cook County already taxes, or already assesses land separately from properties. And I'll just plug that if you go on Redfin and look up any property in Chicago, you can scroll down to the taxes and see what the land assessment is versus the property assessment. And I did this just to compare a property on the south side to a property on the north side. Under the current tax system, the property on the north side, if you have like two similar properties, would be taxed 3 times as high. Under a land value tax, it would be taxed like 30 times as high because the land is so much more valuable on the north side than the south side. The south side ends up paying, you know, more taxes because the property itself is what is being assessed. So you can do this exercise yourself. You can go and look up the land assessment versus the property assessment and just see some real examples of just how unfair the tax system is, and then use that to tell your friends.
Yeah, and first step of getting this implemented, tell your friends. Okay, well, I might take a little issue with this, but we're going with it. We're all a bunch of nerds. We're literally at a land value tax themed variety show. Yes, you are welcome. What do you think is the most important normie thing we lose sight of?
Well, as an economist, I think that most people just don't understand basic economics. So if you start from this position, it's true. If you start from the position of making these arguments about like tax optimization or economic efficiency, you kind of lose people. But if you just talk about fairness, or you talk about how things could be better under a different structure, then I think you could bring more people in. I think everybody intuitively understands the economy because they exist in an economy, so they must understand it on some level. So making a lot of metaphors or just breaking it down, like look at that house versus that house, why do you think this parking lot exists here? That's how you can get through to people.
I think a lesson I learned on the campaign trail, and I'm trying to keep internalized, is the way that many folks are starting from zero. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, I just mean there's a lot going on in people's lives, and most people aren't going to give it a lot. I mean, I ran for an office that most people like don't know exists. So I had to knock on doors and say, hey, how familiar are you with the Cook County Board of Commissioners? And most people give an answer that's like, I'm basically not familiar. And I think the same is true for land value tax, property tax policy, especially for renters who don't see a property tax bill, even though it's priced into their rent. So keeping in mind the way most people are really starting from zero, and maybe they have to see why it's important to care about the things we love to nerd out on.
I think those are great answers. Tell stories, yeah, make good stories. And sometimes you don't have to convince everyone, you just have to convince the nerd commissioner and have a champion on the commission.
All right, so we're almost at time, so this will be our last question, just openly to the panel, but if we'll be here after. If your question didn't get asked, please come up and ask us in person. So last one for you all for right now. With regard to calling LVT the perfect tax, is there any concern that instead of incentivizing land improvement, it incentivizes people to sell land?
Somebody just said good, right? Yes, that's
the right answer.
Fantastic. Yeah, our market needs more land. Developers want more land on the market, particularly depending on the city, and it leads to more development when you do. So I think that's great. Let's sell more land and get more land circulating so that way developers can develop on it.
Yeah, one of the problems with the housing market is a problem of misallocation. Seniors, we just did a study at Redfin, own way more large homes, 3-bedroom homes, than millennials with children. So you have seniors living in these large homes, they don't even use all the bedrooms, and they stay there because their property taxes are not going up with the value of the land. They stay in it longer, they don't sell, and then people who would actually use that housing, would need that housing, don't get to move in. So that's, I think, a feature, not a bug. Also, if you're a YIMBY, you've done all of this work to implement these upzoning laws, you're not actually going to see development until the owners of those single-family homes start selling to people who will actually develop them. So it's healthy. It's healthy for land to move around. I know people get very attached to their homes. They imagine that they're going to stay in there for the rest of their lives. But in a functioning economy, people should be moving. They should be moving to better job opportunities. They should be moving to places that suit them for their point in their life. and we want to see more of that, not less.
To Daryl's point, cities should be dynamic. They need to flex and grow and move to accommodate the changing needs of a changing population. So nothing wrong with land changing hands and being put to better use.
I think that's a great way to close this out. Thank you all. All right, I think the last thing we're doing is the raffle for the very exciting Henry George bobblehead. Ben, you want to do the honors? Thank you all.
One more round of applause for our panel. You paid for the tax stock, but you stayed for the tote gift bag. We're gonna raffle it off. I need some helpers up here. Let's shake this bag up. All right. Let's pick out a ticket. And let's read the number.
843302.
All right. So, actually, I think the bag itself. Amazing. Congratulations. We are at the end of our evening. I want to leave you with just a few last words. The land value tax is one of those ideas that sounds radical and wonky until you understand it. And then when you understand it, it sounds obvious. And you start wondering why we are not already doing it. So this idea is seeded over 140 years ago or so. Get our Marx Brothers routine in. But tonight is basically a beginning. The civic infrastructure, the conversation that was had in this room, the panel, the talk, the experts, the conversation that will continue in the room outside. That is the beginning, and the political will comes next. So keep having this conversation. I do want to thank you to our partners, Strongtown Chicago, CNU Chicago, Public House Illinois, thank you to the IO Theater for hosting us. Thank you to all of our speakers and experts, particularly Goldie and Franny. And genuinely thank you all for spending your Thursday with us to talk about taxes. The bar is open. I would be a horrible rabbi if I did not say, talk to someone you don't know, meet someone. Thank you very much.